All right, everyone. Boris Johnson is getting his general election. The problem is that in order to get the labor movement to sign on to the idea of holding an early election, he had to scrap the idea of a hard Brexit. So, as of right now, if nothing else changes politically within the structure of the UK's parliament, you're not getting a Brexit because you'll get a deal. You'll leave the EU, at least in name. But it'll be a very, very long, very painful process designed specifically by a bunch of globalists to abuse the UK. The problem is, there were always two different contingencies that the EU had to lord over the UK in these proceedings. The first was trying to prevent a Brexit from happening. Obviously, it was triggered, people voted in favor of Brexit. They pulled out all the stops to stop it, which is why I think if you held another people's vote today, I think Remain would lose by an even larger margin. I think that all of the propaganda and dirty tricks that were pulled clearly failed. And in a fair sort of vote, if the referendum hadn't been clogged up by propaganda from the BBC, among other groups, probably Brexit would have won by an even larger margin. The problem is here, there's still one way out, so to speak, to allow a hard Brexit, and that's Boris Johnson and his Brexiteer Tories, and then the Brexit Party and any other people that support Brexit do well enough in the subsequent election to have the representative power to be able to force through a hard Brexit by scrapping the deal that he literally just made with Corbyn and his Labour Party. Do I think that's likely? I'm not sure. I'm sure the Brexit Party will do well. They've been polling at, 12 or 14% or something, which is I think higher than UKIP ever got. UKIP still does technically exist, although it's been basically vampirized at this point. But the problem is this. Imagine that you're a conservative and you're in favor of Brexit. You think Brexit means Brexit, simple as. And Boris Johnson just basically took what he had been promising you, which was a hard, clean-cut Brexit. Now, here and now, it's going to happen. He promised and promised and promised. He just took it off the table. Do you punish him for that? Do you maybe vote for the Brexit Party instead in a particular seat where the Brexit Party can't win and stand on ideological principle, thus undercutting the entire project? Unfortunately, this means that a hell of a lot of conservatives there are going to have really high turnout and not punish their party for basically forsaking a key promise that it's been making for the last few months. That might be difficult for a lot of people to swallow. What I would say is this: when your election happens, if you're in the UK, vote strategically. Vote either for the Conservatives or the Brexit Party based on who can win in that constituency that you're actually voting for. Try to get as many Brexiteers in as possible. Whether they're primarily under the command of Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage is not really going to matter at the end of the day, because you're not going to get a hard Brexit. You've got one more chance to get a hard Brexit. Otherwise, the best case scenario is a punishing, humiliating, abusive deal designed by Theresa May and the EU specifically to make it so painful to leave that one of two things, and these are their other contingencies, would happen. After the fact, the people would want another referendum. They would vote to remain in. They'd say, well, we're tired of this process. It's taking years. It's taking tens of billions of euros. We're not doing it anymore. Fuck it. We want back in. Just fucking admit us back into the EU. And they'd, by and large, I think, do that very quickly. They'd probably change the rules to make admission easier for the UK and say, okay, we understand. Now that you've been a punished, spanked dog, whimpering with its tail between its legs, now you can come back having been humiliated on the world stage. And the other possibility, of course, is that the people would demand that before Brexit's even triggered. The other possibility was always kicking the can down the road long enough for people to demand another vote. Well, it's been 10 years, say the people at some point many years in the future. The demographics are different, the times are different, the economy's different. We want another people's vote on whether we leave at all, because we're not going to get this process right. And even if you get a Brexit deal here, it's going to suck. And so for several years, I believe this isn't even technically the final deal, is it? This is a preliminary deal, if I'm hearing it correctly from some people. This isn't even the clean-cut break. This is setting the stage for a further negotiating process for everything else. And the thing is, if you had a hard Brexit, you could start that right away. You wouldn't need a years-long process. You pay the EU its blood money that you contractually are sworn to pay them, because you signed the contract when you entered the EU, because it's basically a corporate endeavor to give them, what was it, some tens of billions of euros or something. Fucking pony up, pay them their money, deal with the fact that for some years to come, your economy will be in a slump a little bit because you'll have to reestablish all those trade ties because of globalists seeking to abuse you. What they're trying to do is set an example for the rest of the EU. They don't care about the UK leaving. That's not what concerns them. What concerns them is the possibility that the UK leaves, its economy finds its footing, it starts to rise, it does well enough so that other people in other countries will say, hey, look, they left, and 2-3 years on, they're doing better than they were before, or at least they're doing as good. Well, if there's no problem created by leaving the EU, why are we here paying our dues? Why should we have to pay into the system? You'll see that other Western European countries that primarily pay more in than they get out of the EU experiment, at least in fiscal terms, will be the first to do that, along with certain Eastern European nations run by populists and nativists that are tired of the immigration problems going on in the EU with free movement. Those groups will begin to have little movements, and they're going to say, hey, why don't we hold a referendum? Why don't we vote to leave? The British did. Whoa, are the British so much more mighty than us, says maybe Poland 5 years from now. Maybe we should leave. We like this EU thing economically, but we're tired of being bullied by Brussels and by Angela Merkel's people. Maybe the French say, hey, why are we paying so much in and getting so little out and having to deal with all of this regulation? We've already got our own bureaucracy. We're French, friggin', a former major world empire. We're a nuclear power, one of the top 10 economies. Why are we dealing with this bullshit? Maybe the Germans leave. Wouldn't that gut the EU? The piggy bank of Europe. What if they up and leave? Where are you going to get all the money from? You think that France is going to pay into the system 10 times what they do now just to have the EU exist? No. It'll fracture the EU. It'll become a few little blocks of nations that basically just maintain maybe free movement. You'll have an Eastern European bloc. Maybe the Scandinavian countries join. Some of them have talked about joining with the UK if it does fully leave. It'd be interesting to see what happens. That's what they're really worried about. They're worried about it being a domino effect where the UK is just the first of many to leave, weakening their power, ripping Europe apart. Their European experiment, Europe itself will be fine. The people of Europe are intelligent and civilized enough to manage their own thing and get along with each other and form trade deals without an EU overarching authority. You do realize that they're capable of conducting diplomacy. Believe it or not, Europeans are usually pretty good at not killing one another, except every 100 years, some person from Austria or something has a problem, some archduke gets assassinated, and then things change a little bit. But by and large, getting along, drinking some wine together, that's sort of Euro diplomacy. Or some vodka, depending on which side of the continent you're on. There's really no reason for the EU. It doesn't solve any problem. When people say, well, the UK will lose 70 billion pounds or euros or whatever it was denominated in over the next 10 years if it leaves the EU. Yeah, okay, that's speculative. You haven't left the EU yet. Hopefully Boris Johnson's extremely high-risk gambit pays off. I'm skeptical about whether it can. If you're in favor of Brexit, and you're in the UK, you must get out and vote. You must try to get others to do that. I know sometimes there's a malaise, like the turnout tends to be low in a lot of elections in the world because people just say fuck it. They have no sense of civics. This is not the time to do that if you're British. Because fundamentally you're either going to be British or you're going to be a slave. Isn't that like part of your national anthem and shit, not being slaves? Well, fucking make good on that promise. Be brave and put on your big boy pants and realize the UK is one of the main world economies. You've got 180 fucking nuclear warheads. Why are you so worried about having to function like every other nation in the world does? Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If a nation like Cambodia or Guyana can figure its way through the world and exist and be, at least in some ways pretty stable, I would think the UK probably can make it work. I'm pretty sure that even the dying flames of the British Empire are still capable of kindling up a nice little fire. I'm pretty sure that that's capable of being done. Apparently there are people there that don't feel so. They call them Ramoners. I think it's rather sad. Imagine you're in a country that 100 years ago was running roughshod over, a fifth of the world's surface. And now you've got your politicians telling you, the great-grandchild of some crazy explorer who used to hunt hippopotami for a living, now you're being told you can't even own a gun, you can't decide what to do, even your country can't decide. Not only are you a slave to your country, it's grown more authoritarian over the years, although British bureaucracy was already pretty bad 500 years ago. Not only that, even your nation's not allowed to do its own thing anymore. It's being treated like a little kid. I would find that a little bit humiliating. This is exactly why people here in the United States are so reluctant to follow the kind of Euro advice that's been given. Just be a power. Be a nation. Don't try to be... You Americans think you're all that, and you should tone it down a little bit. No, that's a terrible idea, because the British did it. Look at what happens to them now. No thanks. That's about all. Peace out.